it's sort of amazing. They don't talk about the hospital ship Mercy that was also sitting in New York Harbor vacant so that Andrew Cuomo could send your grandmother back into a nursing home infected or amongst other infected people that led to the deaths of thousands of people. That's the insanity of the left today. Honestly, that is probably the bigger scandal, although it seems like perhaps the Democrats are sweeping them under the rug in lieu now of the accusations against our groper-in-chief as governor of New York.
Groper-in-chief, that was Donald Trump Jr. on Fox News describing the current incumbent of the governor's mansion in Albany. Let's unpack all of that with somebody who's just declared Cuomo's sexual harassment scandal is his political obituary. He is the author of The Russia Hoax and Witch Hunt, legal and political analyst for Fox News. Gregg Jarrett, welcome back to America First.
My pleasure, Sebastian. Good talking to you always.
So is this the critical mass? Is the atomic weight of the scandal with 5 accusers? Is that the cutoff? Give us your analysis of how much trouble the governor of New York is finally in.
Randy Andy, as he's increasingly known, is finished. He just doesn't know it yet. He still clings to the arrogant belief that he's invincible and denying that his own actions are to blame for his predicament. This is a guy who's supremely pompous and pretentious, and his own churlish behavior has sealed his demise. I think his career in politics is over. He's got twin scandals that he's groping with, if you'll excuse that word. He lied about thousands of nursing home deaths that he caused directly by sending COVID-infected patients into those nursing homes. And then he provided falsified data. He lied about it. That's also called obstruction of justice and conspiracy to defraud the government. And now his despicable response to these allegations of sexual harassment is to blame the victims. Oh, it's all their fault. They didn't understand flirtation. They misinterpreted my Randy actions. Well, that's not going to work. Nobody in Albany believes it. And frankly, nobody wants to have anything to do with Randy Andy Cuomo anymore. And when the rats abandon ship, all is lost.
But isn't it a condemnation of the state of affairs, Greg, that not only do we have the 14,000 who died as a result of Governor Cuomo's decision to send them back to those nursing homes that couldn't care for them as COVID-infected patients, we have the admission from his advisor on a call to Democrat lawmakers that they hid that evidence from the federal authorities. But none of that seemed to sway his fate. He was given an Emmy. He wrote that book about his great leadership in the midst of the crisis. But it was these young women stepping forward. Surely, whilst those have to be dealt with, those charges have to be investigated, the deaths of thousands of Americans, isn't that the real scandal here?
It is, in the mainstream media, including the New York Times and CNN, ignored the nursing home deaths and the falsification of data, the lies, the obstruction, the fraud perpetrated by Andrew Cuomo and, his hit team in Albany. That should have been front and center. People should have been outraged over it. The mainstream media should have been covering it day by day, hour by hour, and yet they ignored it to protect him. But when victims of his sexual harassment come forward and paint a different picture, only then and grudgingly did the media pay attention? Did politicians begin to get on board? And even Democrats, and we're talking about scores and scores of Democrats, come out of the woodwork and suddenly say, oh, you need to resign or be impeached. And so you're right, Seb. I mean, it's a sad commentary.
You've chronicled in your books the Russia hoax and witch hunt, the travesties of justice, the abuse of power that occurred in the last 5 years in the United States, with nary a consequence for any of the perpetrators. One junior lawyer called Klein Smith has his wrist slapped at the FBI for forging a CIA document. He gets 100 hours of community service. Are we going to see the same again? Even if Cuomo resigns, okay, he's gone. But we're talking about the deaths of thousands of people. And now we know, Greg, don't we, that it's not just him. We have other governors who took the same decision, who also caused or triggered the loss of life for people in old people's homes across America. Is your expectation, as the best legal analyst out there, will there be judicial legal ramifications for any of this?
Well, you're right. Michigan's governor is under fire for the exact same thing. It would normally be a crime, but when a governor does it, they have what's called sovereign immunity.
Right.
But that does not protect someone like Cuomo from obstruction of justice, felony charges, and fraud and conspiracy charges for lying about it to prevent a federal investigation or to hide and conceal the evidence in an elaborate cover-up that is incidental to a federal government investigation. So for part of it, he gets a pass by law, but for the rest of it, he is in criminal jeopardy and, frankly, ought to be prosecuted. He's being investigated by the U.S. Attorney and the FBI for matters that appear to relate to obstruction and fraud and conspiracy. And increasingly there seems to be compelling evidence that he did that which he's now accused.
And given the fact that one of Hunter Biden's quote-unquote colleagues is now one of the most senior officials in the Biden Department of Justice, does this mean anything? Have we become a nation of a land of no consequences?
Yeah, I think sadly you have put it correctly. It's such an incestuous place, Washington, D.C., and especially those who hold the reins of power, and their family and friends take advantage of it, and they also engage in cooperative cover-ups. And anybody who is connected at all to Hunter and Joe Biden should be automatically disqualified and recused. It says so right there in federal regulations that govern people who work at the Department of Justice and investigatory agencies. So, in a perfect world, they would have nothing to do with it, but we sadly don't live in that perfect world. And I fear undue influence by those close to President Biden and, members of his family.
He's the author of The Russia Hoax and Witch Hunt, the story of the greatest mass delusion in American political history. Follow him at Gregg Jarrett on Twitter, 2 G's, 2 R's, 2 T's, and also thegreggjarrett.com. Back with Greg after these messages, broadcasting from the ReliefFactor.com studios on the Salem Radio Network from just outside the insalubrious fetid swamp that is Washington, D.C. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, don't you dare touch that dial.
From the ReliefFactor.com studios, this is America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Update on Randy Andy. It's not 5, it's 6 accusers. The 6th has stepped forward. Somebody who, in the executive mansion of the governor of New York, was inappropriately touched by Andrew Cuomo. At the moment, the identity of that individual is being kept a secret, but now it is half a dozen women who have made the same accusation. We are back with our good friend Gregg Jarrett. He is the author of The Russia Hoax and also Witch Hunt. Follow him at Gregg Jarrett and thegreggjarrett.com. Greg, let's try and hit two topics in this short segment with you. Number one, in Hungarian, they call the constitution the basic law, law number one, in other words. How is it that we have this Bill H.R. 1 in front of Capitol Hill that seems to say the Constitution no longer matters and the stipulation that states get to run elections is no longer applicable and that we will federalize elections?
Well, it's trashing the Constitution. It's a blatant attempt to rig the system in favor of Democrats. It's a power grab. And, you know, what I find so offensive about it is that the Constitution says, you know, states dictate their voting laws. But this bill would eliminate the state role and, you know, set this template that is federal, that legalizes, for example, ballot harvesting, which is a recipe for fraud. It bans state voter ID requirements. So, you know, if I want to check into a hotel, I have to show a voter an identification. But if I want to vote, I don't. And how does that make sense? That is also a recipe for fraud and overvoting. You know, it compels states to send out mail-in ballots universally. That favors, as we know, statistically Democrats who tend to use the method. It forces states to count ballots that arrive by mail late, 10 days after the election, as it happened in Pennsylvania, where the Supreme Court there just simply said, we're now the super legislature. We dictate the rules and not those we elect in the legislature. So, you know, it's a power grab. It trashes the Constitution. You know, I hope it doesn't pass.
Well, we have to find out if there's one sane Democrat senator in the upper house who can stop it. The second story, not a trashing of the Constitution, but the trashing of the U.S. Code. I've just reposted it on my Twitter feed, Seb Gorka. This is from Gregg's website, thegreggjarrett.com. Why would the Department of Justice, Gregg, drop a third of the charges against individuals charged with assaulting federal officers across the riots we witnessed in America in the last 10 months?
Well, I have to think it's bias, although their excuse invariably is lack of evidence. But, you know, I hate to see, and we saw this certainly in the Russia hoax, you know, a politicization of our justice system and how those in power in the intelligence community and the FBI, a branch of the Department of Justice, weaponized their power for political purposes. And, you know, I fear that increasingly that's happening in America. And it strikes me that this is an administration under Joe Biden that has no inclination to do what's fair and right when it comes to our system of justice.
And if I understand correctly, in most cases, these dismissed charges were dismissed with prejudice, meaning that scot-free. You can't bring it up again. Isn't that unusual?
It is unusual. Usually they would be dropped without prejudice. They can be refiled upon discovery of additional, more compelling evidence. But here, they cannot be refiled. They cannot be charged. They have been dismissed with prejudice. And so, you know, it's just another wrinkle in the distressing situation that I think we're finding more and more within the Department of Justice.
And it will get worse before it gets better. In the meantime, listen to his latest podcast, Governor Cuomo's sexual harassment scandal is his political obituary. He's Gregg Jarrett, legal and political analyst for Fox News. Follow him at Gregg Jarrett and check out his fabulous books, The Russia Hoax and The Witch Hunt. Thank you, Gregg. Please keep doing what you do. This is America First, the Salem Radio Network, coming to you from the ReliefFactor.com studios.